Chapter 11. Sunday mid-morning. Doreen watched as Crystal waved goodbye a second time as she headed down the cul-de-sac to the corner. As soon as she was out of sight, Doreen took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "That was a visit we didn't expect," she said to Muggs. He woofed by her side and smiled that goofy grin of his. She reached down and cuddled him close. Then she said, "That's the plus side of what we do that we don't often get to see, isn't it?" But then again, Crystal had been a missing persons case. It wasn't like she was a dead body buried somewhere with a toe tag and a cold case number. And that made all the difference too. Doreen walked back into the kitchen and brought out the Solomon files again, more determined than ever to not forget whatever was here. She painstakingly typed a list of all the names on the folders. She was surprised Solomon didn't have one already prepared in here, but maybe it was because he knew them all intimately. She opened each folder to figure out what the case was all about. She didn't want to read through them all, but thankfully, Solomon had placed a short summary at the first page of each file. She scanned the summary for each file, and by the time she was done, she had a pretty decent-sized Word document to give her a quick overview of each file. Then she realized that, although she said she was done, she had only done one box, and she had 3 more to go. Groaning, she switched out the boxes and began the next one. When her phone rang, it was Nan. "I had a visitor this morning," Doreen said in a happy but quiet voice. "Who?" Nan asked curiously. "You don't get too many of those, do you? At least not strangers." "No," Doreen said. And then she explained who showed up. Nan gasped and cried out in joy. "Oh, that's lovely," she said. "I know there'll be charges all around on her case because it impacted so many other cases as well, but it's nice Crystal came to your door." "How did she look?" "Happy," Doreen said. "Delighted to be home, I think." She was content to have been reunited with her mother, and happy to have something to do with her family again. "She's also applying to the local university, I think, with an eye to eventually becoming a lawyer. At least at this point." "Yes, she's young yet," Nan said. "Give her 10 years, and she could be doing something completely different." "At least now she has a new start to her adult life," Doreen said. "Yes, dear," Nan said. "Speaking of life, a bunch of us are going down to a little restaurant off the beach. Would you like to come?" Doreen stared at the phone in surprise. "Oh, I don't normally get a lunch invitation with a whole group of you," she said with a frown. "Why are you going to this place?" "It's all about gardening," Nan said. "A bunch of us are garden fanatics, but we're all kind of old and doddering, so we might not be quite your cup of tea." Doreen chuckled. "You're hardly doddering. You're spry and have a very vibrant and sharp mind." "I know," Nan said with a note of satisfaction. "Also, a really nice little bakery is beside the restaurant." "What kind of a restaurant?" Doreen asked, wishing she hadn't had such a hefty breakfast. "I ate a big plate of spaghetti this morning." "Oh," Nan said. "Well, why don't we pass this time then, and you can come next time?" As soon as Nan said that, she hung up and left Doreen staring at her cell phone screen. She wondered what that was all about. Nan had revoked her invitation as soon as she realized Doreen had had spaghetti for breakfast, as if there was some rule about that. It brought back images of her ex with all his rules for her. Forcing those thoughts to the back of her mind, she went back to work again. An hour went by before she knew it. She finished the second box and then closed her laptop and stood, calling the animals. "Come on," she said. "We need to get some physical work done." Just when she was about to head out to the backyard with her gardening gloves, the front doorbell rang again. She frowned as Muggs once again went off barking and howling at the front door. She walked to the door and opened it to see her neighbor Richard glaring at her, but he held something in his hand. She looked at the odd bag and frowned. "It was in the garden," Richard said. "On the opposite side closer to my other neighbor." But I doubt it's related. Thank you, Doreen said, taking the item from him. We don't really have any answers to give you yet, though. I didn't think so. He shrugged and said, answers would be good. And then he turned and stomped away. She watched him go before turning her attention to the bag in her hand. It looked like the contents of a purse with several pieces of ID. She shuffled into the kitchen and spilled the contents of the bag onto the kitchen table, and realized they were all from the same woman. Meredith Pollock, according to the IDs. Doreen knew Mac would have a heyday if she touched the contents though, but she wasn't sure what else she was supposed to do if she wanted to examine the pieces. And then she got a bright idea. She opened her scanner, grabbed her tweezers, and gently scanned each piece into her scanner, so she had a digital copy of both the front and back sides. Then she picked up her phone, dialed, and said, Mac? Yes, it's my name. Don't wear it out, he said with maybe a smile, but the fatigue in his voice was evident, making his attempted humor fall flat. Did you find any bodies on Steve's property? Good morning, Doreen. How are you? That meant she wouldn't get any answer. My neighbor just came back over, she said abruptly. Which neighbor and why do I care? The one who had the handcuffs and the diamond ring. At that, she sensed a change in the air. And he found a few more things. He said he found these pieces closer to his other neighbor's side. I think that was just his way of saying it could have been his neighbor standing there and throwing the stuff in Richard's garden. What did he find? Doreen walked to her laptop, opened it up, and said, 3 IDs. What kind of IDs? He growled. She typed in Mac's name on a new email, attached the scans, and sent it to him. I just sent you scans of them, she said. You touched them all, of course? With tweezers. But you can bet that Father Time and Mother Nature had their grubby fingers all over them, she said in exasperation. As did my neighbor. However, they're all in a bag right now, and I used tweezers to scan them in. There was a moment of silence as he clicked on his keyboard. Did you get the email? She asked. It's just coming in, and you could tell me more, you know? I could, she said, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. And just like that, to be perverse at the start of his day, she hung up on him. She moved about and cleaned the teapot and cups from Crystal's visit, then realized she hadn't had a chance to even tell Mac about Crystal. As she headed back outside to the garden yet again, she thought she heard something. Probably her phone, because she'd left it on the railing, so she ignored it. She wanted to get some work done, and he'd call back later either way. She worked on the garden another 4 feet toward the house. But then she heard a sound behind her. She spun around and was surprised to see Mac with his hands on his hips, glaring at her. She raised her hands, palms up. Now you're pissed at me again. Why? I wonder why, he said. Where are the IDs? On the kitchen table, she said cheerfully. And you may want to talk to the neighbor about where it was he found all this stuff. Remember? I'm the police, he said. I'm pretty sure I can figure out what to do on my own. Doreen shrugged and said, Okay, so you're grumpy today. I got it. I'm grumpy because you keep hanging up on me, he said with half a chuckle. And I know you think it's fun to do, but there are times it's just a pain in the ass because I have to drive down here. Right, Doreen said. She put down her shovel and walked into her kitchen, grabbed the bag and handed it to him. He looked at it and nodded. So we're getting more and more pieces. Interesting. I know, she said. And those are relatively clean. Meaning? Meaning we haven't had rain in days, she said with an airy wave of her hand. But you might want to consider that, potentially, this stuff hasn't been there long. Mac raised his head. Interesting point. And of course they're laminated, so the weather, rain or snow, wouldn't hurt them anyway, so maybe that's a moot point. Correct, he said with a nod. As he turned to leave, Doreen said, I had an interesting visitor today, too. He turned back halfway and looked at her, waiting. Crystal stopped by. The gentlest of smiles whispered across his face. Good. I'm glad she came. She told me that she wanted to, and I told her that you would be welcoming, but she was a little hesitant. She has no reason to be hesitant. I was so happy to see a live person at the end of her case. Understanding came into Mac's eyes as he studied her. It is quite hard, isn't it? It is. She nodded. So many dead. From accidents, from suicide, from murder. She shook her head. In this case, I'm absolutely thrilled Crystal was alive and well. We sat outside on my minuscule deck and had tea. Your deck's fine for now until you decide what you want, Mac said cheerfully. Then he turned and left. Doreen waited a moment or two, and then walked around to the side of the garage to see if Mac had gone to Richard's. Sure enough, he was talking to him, and they were out in the front. She walked up to her front steps so she'd get a better look and yet stayed out of view, just enough to see where they had found the IDs. It did look like it was close to the other neighbor's side. That was an interesting possibility. She contemplated who lived there, but she couldn't remember. That was one of the sad facts about being here. She had met the woman on the left corner, but that woman had attacked her, and of course she had her grumpy neighbor, Richard. But who else resided in her cul-de-sac? She didn't remember or never knew their names. She walked back inside, her mind full of details. Surely there was some way to get more answers here.